This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. There's been a lot of debate about what the Browns should do, if the Browns are going to get a new stadium, and where that stadium should be. And I thought Pete Smith, who writes for the OBR, had a very interesting perspective about this and kind of the strategy behind how Jimmy has presented the choices to the public. Did it surprise you, like at the beginning of this, where he just kind of flat out was like, hey, it's either downtown or Brook Park by the time that we got there? Like, how has this unfolded to you in your perspective?
So my biggest takeaway is that the Browns and the Haslams have gotten a lot more savvy with how they message. Because let's just look at what they did there. Coming into the league meeting, like everybody was expecting them to talk about the stadium, and that's not necessarily like great news. I mean, it can be sort of a divisive topic. You're not necessarily getting progress. It's like potentially not a great story. So what do? They go, oh, by the way, we're going to extend the coach and the GM. They win the news day by doing that. It's like really smart, because then when they actually announce like the deals for those guys, it's another win in the day. Like the stadium stuff was immediately moved to the back burner because everybody, myself included, we have to cover, oh, they're going to extend the coach and the GM, even though we've known for the longest time that was obviously going to happen. But it was just really smart. So to me, one, I think it's smart the way they crafted this. They have moved right past yes or no, and they're giving you this or that, which is smart. Look at what's going on in Kansas City, where Kansas City's ownership, this team has won 3 Super Bowls and they hate the owner. Like, how do you pull that off? Like, that's insane to be hated as an owner when your team has won 3 Super Bowls. And they basically said the Chiefs want to renovate their stadium and the Royals want to build a new downtown stadium. And they basically said, hey, we want to extend this sales tax to pay for this. They didn't say, hey, they're not selling you on an idea. They're not doing that. They just said, gimme. And that county voted it down. Whereas the Browns are sort of manipulating, but in a way that's like they're romancing you a little bit. Like they're taking you out to dinner. They're doing all this stuff to like sell you on a vision. And it's like an attractive vision of the future. Now, when they do that, they are giving you a false choice. There's nothing here that they're actually interested in. No one wants to renovate the old stadium. Like, I know I run into an occasional person who's like, yeah, we should totally invest $1 billion into a stadium no one really likes anyway, that's not going to get a dome, that's not going to get a roof of any kind. And we should just continue to do this because there's some spirit of Cleveland. There's some element of, Browns football needs to be played out in awful weather, like the Saints game, which is a nightmare. And if you are a person who wants to attend games, tickets are increasing every year. There is some expectation that you are paying this money to not hate going. And that's a big part of this element. But like the idea of them presenting you an option nobody wants versus what they really want is really smart, even if it's a completely manipulative from their standpoint.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, look at how Jimmy and D have grown, I guess, in the last 12 years that they've owned the team. Because, I mean, they've had some miraculous fumbles. I mean, like the biggest one I could think of is the Johnny Manziel like telling ESPN, "Hey, man, we did this because some guy told me to, like some homeless guy told me to, like, or at least inferring that was, even though that's not what he was trying to get at. It still came off like that to now being a little bit more clever with it. Like, from your perspective, obviously you feel like they've improved in their messaging and kind of their marketing era. But like, when you look at the Browns, when you look at their ownership, when you see Jimmy and D today versus 2012, where do you see their best areas of improvement are, and do they still have those giant glaring flaws that they had back then?
Well, I mean, the biggest difference is they've hired football people that they genuinely
Yes.
trust and they let them do football things. Like Jimmy and D Haslam are great at going and glad handing when they put in a brand new field around at Cleveland High School.
Hmm.
It doesn't cost them a ton of money to do it, but it's awesome. Or down in Akron or whatever. It looks great for them. They are tremendous when they get to go do that type of project. Like that is their world. If you've ever gotten a chance to meet with them, they're very nice. You know, that's their element. So long as they trust the people who are running their football team, like how a functional organization works, they get to look good because they don't have to sit here and put out fires or talk about firing the third coach in however many years and all this stuff. Like they just get to come out and celebrate with the team when they win. Like that's the ideal scenario for them.
Yeah, it's just you don't have to see them have to fire like a bunch of different guys, and also have to make that dreaded year-end press conference. Like the fact that that's not happening anymore. Remember that one where they would come out like right after week 17, and you're just like, oh god, somebody's gonna get.
Yeah, I still remember the one where I think it was. I don't want to be wrong on this, but one of the local stations put in somebody just to like heckle them with questions.
Mm-hmm.
Like what was it, the Larry Moe and Curly question that they got asked when that type of stuff. It was it made the media look like a clown because the Browns were a clown show at that point. So like it's definitely, there's definitely a learning curve in ownership, but it's like anything else. When you're paying this much money for what is effectively a toy, you want to play with it. And you're seeing that right now with Carolina, where they are having to do what the Browns used to do, and they pay a prohibitive tax to get people to go there. So you're going, oh, why are they paying $100 million for a guard? Because they have to, because no one's going there if they don't.
Nothing says paying the prohibitive tax like giving Jadeveon Clowney a second year. He's been waiting for play.
Listen, the second you start seeing the money flying around for free agent contracts, you knew Jadeveon Clowney was like, yeah, I'm going to Carolina. It's just how much they're going to give me to go there.
They were like, I was talking to somebody who covers the Baltimore Ravens. Like, I don't get why he moved. Like, he had a good year here. He liked it here. I was like, they offered him the second year. He's been looking for it since he like left Houston. He hasn't.
Listen, man, I get it. Like, I get why people are like, oh, why does he want to win? Like, I have I'm not going to hate on the idea of him getting paid as much as humanly possible to play football. More power to him.
No, man, he's 30. Like, if he gets 2 years, he got to take it. Like, at this point, like he can't keep doing 1 year deals. Like, when else one day he's going to be like 34 on a 1 year deal and it's done. Like, but one of the things I think that's super interesting about this whole debate about the Browns is this argument about indoor versus outdoor football. Do you have a preference on this?
Yeah, I want to watch great players play great. Like I've never understood the argument. Like I don't get it from a standpoint of fans who want to suffer outside in miserable conditions. You have Chiefs fans that lost digits to frostbite this past year. Like, come on, like, what are we doing here? Like, and I get it. Like, they can't sue, but you feel like they should be able to sue. Like the idea that, whether it was the Saints game or this past year, one of the games where there was just there seems to be one game a year right now that is just awful. Like the Saints game was one of the worst things you could watch. Even the Bengals game was no fun this year. Like, honestly, the first game, week 1, with that rain, terrible game where neither quarterback could really function, was not fun. Like, weather favors the worst team. Like, the Browns don't suck anymore. Why are we wanting to help out what was a bad team in the Saints? Like, they are good. Like, the other part of that is, like, you are paying right now $46 million per season for Deshaun Watson, and he's throwing to a $20 million receiver in Amari Cooper and a $15 million tight end in David Njoku. Like, why would you want to not be able to use these? And like the Saints game, it stood out that the ball bounces right off the Amari Cooper's chest in the end zone, and because he's slipping and falling as we goes, and probably is contemplating whether or not this existence is worth it. There is a recruiting element to this whole thing that people don't want to recognize. Like, yes, there's undoubtedly money involved, but if you're one of the top players in the league, you're going to get the top money And at the rest of it is just, where do you want to go? The state tax element that plays a factor, the location, like Miami's always got an extra element, or some of these teams like Los Angeles teams always have this sort of extra little advantage. But like, there's this part of it where like you have to be able to sell people on playing in your city, and it's not fun. And like, the thing that JC Treader sort of innovated, this NFLPA report card, is giving players more information on this stuff. So you're seeing teams even respond to this, where it's becoming a little bit more like college, where you're seeing a little bit of an arms race. You're seeing teams try to improve their stuff because they don't want to end up in some of these places where, what was rats in Jacksonville's locker room, or the Bengals don't have outlets to plug in your phone. Like, these little things the teams don't have, they make a difference. So like, and the other part of that is like, they come from these colleges who have spectacular setups where like there's a TV screen that is in the like part of your locker is the TV screen. And they come to these teams that like, every team looks like a poverty franchise compared to that. Like, you have to sort of respond to that. And like, you can sit there and say they're spoiled or whatever, but like, it's also an investment from your standpoint. You want your players to be good. Like, lastly, I would point out that like, when the Browns play, the sort of AFC North football, it changes how they have to craft their team. Like, they don't go after certain players because they aren't a good fit. Like, Xavier Worthy is a guy who stands out to me. Like, as somebody who goes, oh man, that'd be really fun in Cleveland. Like, okay, it's really fun for the first 2 months. I don't know if it's going to be fun for the last 2.5, because he may be diminished in some capacity because, a strong wind off the lake may brush him right off the field because he's 160 pounds or whatever it is. Tank Dell was a guy that a lot of people liked last year. I don't know that you can count on that working in the AFC North. Like, what do the Browns have? They have a bunch of 200-pound receivers, which is great. I mean, I like that style of football, but I don't like the idea of you being limited in how you build your team based on the environment, because ultimately the Super Bowl is going to be in spectacular conditions, and you don't want to be at a disadvantage where the other team doesn't have to think about this stuff. The other team just gets to go, hey, we want whatever we want. We're going to build our team exactly how we feel like we want to build it, and it's going to be great. Even though you're going to have to play some games outdoors, getting that 8-9 games a year at home changes how you have to build your team in a way that I think helps you just by having more options.
And I think the thing a lot of people don't think about is like, hey, it becomes even more of a factor if you're really good and you do get the 1 seed or you get the 2 seed, and now you're playing 2 home games or 2 home games extra later in February/January as we move this schedule down. Like, if they add an 18th game, you're talking about playing in outdoor in Cleveland with 31st, 2nd, the 12th. Like, it could just be super deep into that horrible part of the year for weather in Cleveland. And like, it's legitimately held back teams before. Like, you see Aaron Rodgers, he made the 1 Super Bowl early in his career, and then every other year after that, it seemed like at some point they just couldn't move the ball anymore for whatever reason. And that reason, weather was part of it.
Well, look at Buffalo against the Cincinnati Bengals when they hosted the playoff game, and Joe Mixon just ran them over, and the Bills had no one that could run the ball.
Yep.
And Josh Allen was limited in what he could do throwing the ball. Like, you literally have people in Buffalo going, we have a team that can't play in its own environment. Like, that's idiotic. It makes no sense. Like, you have this, what you believe is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and you are actually making him less effective. It makes no sense. So like, there are competitive elements to this, and like the home field advantage thing. Like, if you put Cleveland fans it basically was a cage at that point for the opposing team, it's going to be insane. Like, that stadium can shake as it is. Put a roof on it. That it's going to be a game changer for how much they can bring into that. And there's no home field advantage when there's no crowd there because they don't want to brave the elements. It's too expensive. There's all these other things, components with it. Like, if you were paying attention to social media or in Cleveland yesterday, you probably saw images of $80 parking. Like, it's another element to this that's like prohibitive on one element. And like, there are aspects of this whole stadium project where the Haslam see an opportunity, and I think is going to end up being more attractive for people in the long run.
Yeah, and it's like if the Browns do have that home playoff game and you want the Browns to be able to enjoy it, or you're all the Browns fans to enjoy it. I know a lot of people are like, hey, my grandpa's been watching the Browns forever. You want him to actually be able to go to that if he has the chance to. If it is 12 degrees, there's a good chance that he can't go to that game or she can't go to that game.
Right. Or
And
kids. My God, you got kids that they're going to turn to you and go, second quarter, Dad, I want to go home. Like, what are you going to do? You're not going to make them sit out there and die. You're sort of stuck there. And like, that's a big part of it. Like, you want to expand the amount of people who are able to attend these games, because if you are the Browns, you are the Haslams, you want every penny. And even though you sold tickets to games like the Saints game or whatever, nobody's buying anything there. They're not buying merch. They're not buying food. They're not buying all these things that ramp up the amount of revenue you make. In the when you have the chance, you want to maximize every dollar you can get, which I get is sort of this greedy aspect of it, which is undoubtedly part of this, but it's also like logical from a football standpoint.
yeah, and I feel like when you boil it down, a lot of people's connection to the outdoor football stadium is just it's an emotional connection where it's like, hey, I remember the Browns playing outside. It feels like the Browns when they're playing outside, but the Browns are going to feel like whatever you see on Sunday. Like that's always so. If they play in a dome for the next 10 years, it'll be weird to look at the highlights where they're not in a dome in 10 years after that, right? Like you're gonna get used to whatever the status quo is for the team, and for the city, it talks about how cursed that plot of land is. Like we should not be this hard pressed to move off of it, right? Like
there's that, and look, man, TV is really good. Like straight up, you could spend thousands of dollars on season tickets, or you can spend half that much money and get a spectacular TV to watch everything at home. You don't have to spend your whole day there. Like these are things the NFL is acknowledging that they have to compete against. And like you're talking about grandpa may be perfectly happy to watch not just the Browns game, but 3 more football games at home on his very nice setup, as opposed to making the trip. You've got to compete against these elements. And I think we're quickly approaching a time where domes above a certain, basically above the Mason-Dixon line are almost going to be required to be domes anyway. I think like the Bills as an example, I think the Bills are going to be disappointed the second that thing's built, because you're stuck with it. Like how many years are you going to be insisting on being in this thing? I think a lot of teams, I will be very surprised if we see many more outdoor stadiums built. I think the Browns are setting a tone with that. I think the NFL is going to quietly encourage teams to try to get this as much as possible.
Another thing to watch, just in the whole AFC North picture, is if the Browns go with the dome, they will be the first domino that might fall in the cascade, because you look at Baltimore, they're going to need a new stadium soon. Their stadium's just as old, if not older than ours. Cincinnati, we'll see what Mike Brown does, because he don't really like it's a different situation there, right? He can't just like build a new stadium without public funds, and it's a little bit more difficult for them there. But Pittsburgh, I know this sounds foreign to a lot of fans because like the AFC North's been outdoor football incarnate for so long. But if the Browns go dome, then that's the first team in the division to do it. I'm pretty sure Baltimore will. Like there's nothing really stopping them. Pittsburgh might have a difficult time doing it, but they probably will too. And next thing you know, you don't want to be kind of behind everybody else where you're playing outside. You're not able to build the team that you want. Like if the Bengals, like if they could just manifest the dome, I'm pretty sure they would want to, even though the weather's not as bad in Cincinnati as it is up north in Cleveland. Because you have Joe Burrow, you have those, well, you at least have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins under contract this year. You want to air it out, and weather has gotten in their way a couple of years. So it's just gonna be interesting to see how this whole thing kind of pans out with the stadium. When do you think the stadium's gonna get built?
Best guess, the thing will be done if everything goes the way they are working it, and the Haslams are basically have pre-planned this out, where they're going to eliminate all of the barriers in their way. Probably about 2029 is when they're looking for this thing to be finished. So even if you're, not excited about the dome, you've got several more years in the stadium to enjoy every bit of outdoor football you can get.
Yeah, and I brought this point up on Twitter. I'm like, it's funny that this stadium could have been torn down and destroyed, like within all up until probably 2020. But yeah, and nobody would have cared because
Right.
nobody had memory. All we talked about with this stadium was how it wasn't like the old one, how we didn't have it wasn't as loud, it didn't have the memories, it wasn't as unique, and how it kind of stunk in comparison to what the memories were of Municipal, even though it was a terrible facility. And now it's getting to the point to where I think people are going to have some pretty positive memories attached with this stadium. And that's kind of interesting. And that's when this stadium goes, is when people actually care that it's not going to be there anymore. But just how it went for Cleveland Browns Stadium. Thank you, Pete, for coming on. Make sure you check him out at Browns OBR. Anywhere else they can find you, Pete?
You can find me on Twitter at _Pete Smith _. But yeah, OBR is where all my work's at.
All right, awesome. Thank you for coming on. I want to thank you guys for watching. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.